This yellow fat sparked a religious schism, bankrupted peasants, and helped fracture the church that once ruled Europe. And you still keep this ancient troublemaker, unbothered, right on the top shelf of your refrigerator door today. For centuries, butter was pure heresy. Cathedrals were paid for with churn, and one humble fat divided Christendom. It drew a line across the map of Europe and stitched itself into the daily conscience of millions. How did a simple dairy spread become a spiritual crime? To understand, you must understand the thing itself. Butter is nothing more than the fat of fresh milk, agitated until cream breaks and golden solids separate. Just a shepherd, a wooden vessel, a long ride on horseback. That is all it ever really took. Yet for thousands of years, this ordinary product carried an extraordinary weight across the whole of the northern world. Europe, long before it was Catholic or even Protestant, was already divided by a line drawn in fat. In the south, along the warm Mediterranean coasts, the ancient olive tree ruled with a quiet, glistening authority. Its oil lit lamps, anointed kings, and slicked frying pans from Andalusia to the far reaches of Anatolia. In the north, where the olive refused to grow, the humble cow reigned supreme over every peasant hearth. Milk, cream, and butter became not just food, but the very language spoken every day at the northern table. But here's the thing. That dietary line was not merely culinary. It was, in profound truth, deeply theological. The medieval church, inheriting old Roman fasting traditions, forbade all animal fats during Lent, Fridays, and holy vigils. Nearly 1/3 of the entire year fell under this rule. Oil was permitted, because it came from plants. But butter, born of an animal, was flesh in disguise, a dark, sinful shadow on every northern plate. So geography quietly dictated cuisine, and cuisine quietly dictated theology across the whole map of Christian medieval Europe. To live north of the olive line was to live under a permanent, unresolved, and eternal Lenten problem. But here's the thing. The first butter wasn't even food. It was medicine, a healing balm older than any recipe. Thousands of years ago, a Neolithic herder tied a skin of milk to his ox and rode home across grassy plains. By evening, the jostling had done its work. The cream had broken inside the skin, transformed into something wholly new. A soft, pale, fragrant substance no one had tasted before. That accident gave humanity its first true fat concentrate. In the peat bogs of Ireland, waxy lumps still surface, wrapped in birch bark, 3,500 years old. The bogs preserved them like relics, cool, airless, timeless. Some were offerings, buried to appease the spirits of the land. In ancient Sumer, temple hymns praised butter as the food of the gods, sacred as any offering laid before them. In India, ghee, clarified butter, became the fuel of sacrifice, poured onto sacred fire to carry prayers upward. To the Vedic mind, ghee was the shining essence of the cosmos, the golden thread between man and the divine. Rome, however, was not impressed. Greek and Roman writers spoke of butter with the mild horror reserved for foreign customs. Pliny called it the most delicate of foods among barbarian nations, a curiosity of rough and distant northern tribes. The historian Anaxandrides mocked the Thracians as butter-eaters, a term of insult in the polished salons of Athens. For Mediterranean peoples who bathed in olive oil and anointed their dead with it, butter smelled wrong and northern. Rome mocked it, but the North quietly worshipped it. And when the empire fell to ruin, the churning simply never stopped. Butter did not need the Mediterranean or the empire. It needed only a cow, a bucket, and patient northern hands. And in the long centuries that followed, this quiet fat became something Rome had never imagined possible: hard money. In medieval Norway, butter was currency itself. Rent was paid in butter. Tithes were paid in butter. Dowries were counted in casks. Firkins were wooden casks holding roughly 56 pounds of salted gold, stacked cool and heavy in every farmhouse cellar. Royal taxes could be settled in butter, and entire villages measured their prosperity by how many barrels sat cool below. When a Norwegian bishop toured his diocese in the 1200s, his accounts recorded the receipt of butter by the ton. Across the North Sea, monastic dairies scaled the craft into an industry, treating butter as a serious economic instrument. Cistercian brothers, with disciplined ledgers and vast granges, bred better cows, built colder cellars, and standardized every churn. What had been a farmhouse art became, in the shadow of the cloister, a proto-industrial trade of measurable weight and price. But here's the thing: butter was more than food. It was medicine, smeared onto burns and open wounds by careful hands. It was cosmetic, softening the hands of noblewomen, and lamp fuel through long northern winters when tallow ran painfully short. Beeswax was reserved for altars, so butter burned in humble homes, its golden flame flickering across smoke-blackened rafters above. Heavily salted, it could travel down German rivers, across the Baltic in Hanseatic cogs, into Bruges, Lübeck, and Novgorod. Northern butter reached southern tables, and southern coin flowed steadily north in return. The quiet fat had conquered Rome. For centuries this worked. Then Rome drew a line through the dinner plate, and butter became a crime. The Lenten fat ban was old, but its enforcement hardened in the high Middle Ages across Europe. No butter, no lard, no cheese, no eggs. Only oil, only fish, only bread was permitted. For a Provençal peasant, this was manageable. Olive oil was cheap and everywhere across Mediterranean lands. For a Flemish weaver or Bavarian miller, it was catastrophe. There were simply no olives up north. Imported oil arrived rancid, expensive, scarce. Fish was seasonal. Nuts and poppy seed substitutes proved bitter and poor. To fast by Roman law was, in the north, to starve by the letter of the frozen climate. The Church, ever pragmatic, offered a solution. For a fee, a bishop could grant a formal dispensation, a butter letter permitting the faithful to eat dairy fat during Lent in defiance of centuries of doctrine. At first, these were rare indulgences granted to the sick, the pregnant, the elderly. Then they grew common. By the 15th century, entire cities negotiated collective dispensations, paying yearly sums into episcopal coffers for buttered Lent. The most famous monument still stands in Normandy. The great Cathedral of Rouen needed a north tower. It was funded in large part by the sale of butter dispensations to the devout Norman faithful. The people paid to eat what they had always eaten, and the tower rose stone by coin. It is called the Tour de Beurre, the Butter Tower, a Gothic spire built on a spiritual loophole. The system was ingenious. It was also fragile. A spiritual loophole lasts only until someone asks why God requires payment. Selling permission to eat fat would backfire catastrophically. The loudest questioner was a German monk named Martin Luther. When he nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in 1517, indulgences were chief among his grievances. But butter was in the argument. Luther mocked a church that made men buy paper letters for morning cream. The butter letter, he thundered, was not piety. It was extortion. For Northern faithful, this argument hit home hard. They had lived under the fat frontier for generations, knowing every winter the sting of purchased permission from Rome. When Luther declared God did not sell fasting by the ounce, they heard what they'd waited centuries to hear. And so butter became, quietly, a Reformation grievance, not the loudest, but one of the most intimate of all. Because reform was not only preached from pulpits, it was practiced on kitchen tables. The fat frontier collapsed. In Protestant lands, butter was eaten in Lent without guilt, without payment, without a bishop's seal at all. The churn ran freely, the cellars filled. The old system of dispensations evaporated within a single generation. South of the line, the Catholic Church dug in. Olive oil, sanctified by tradition, remained the orthodox fat. To use butter in Lent was to signal, subtly, that one leaned toward the northern Protestant heresy. In Italy, in Spain, in southern France, dairy fat now carried a heavy shadow of ecclesiastical suspicion. Cookbooks split. Cuisines split. A Milanese kitchen and an Amsterdam kitchen, once merely different, became theologically opposed. Butter mapped almost perfectly onto confessional geography. The map of European Protestantism nearly matches the map of butter consumption. The map of European Catholicism nearly matches the map of olive oil. This is not coincidence at all. It is the residue of 500 years of fasting law, dispensation revenue, and daily choice of bread's fat. Trade followed doctrine. Dutch and Danish dairies boomed. Salted butter, packed in oak firkins, sailed to every willing port. Hanseatic merchants grew rich on the fat trade. Southern powers responded with tariffs, embargoes, and strict sumptuary laws. Trade wars over butter simmered from the 1600s onward, small beside great confessional struggles, yet tightly bound to them. The schism was set. Then came the bloodshed. The wars of religion tore Europe apart for over a century. Cities burned, populations halved. Yet through it all, the fat frontier held its ground, redrawn only at its edges. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 recognized what the churn had already established across the divided continent. North and South would eat, worship, and cook differently. And no army was ever going to change that fact. But butter had its own crises. Rancid butter, poorly salted or overlong stored, could poison an entire household. In famine years, adulterated butter, cut with tallow, with lard, with worse, sparked riots across hungry cities. Peasants who paid dear coin for firkins of grease that turned green in the pot did not stay peaceful. Butter fraud was one of Europe's oldest food scandals, growing worse as cities swelled and supply chains grew longer. Then, in 1869, Emperor Napoleon III of France issued a competition for a cheap, stable fat. He wanted a fat for armies and urban poor that wouldn't spoil in soldiers' packs or tenement pantries. A French chemist named Hippolyte Mege-Morier answered the call, taking beef tallow and treating it with milk. He produced a pale, glossy substance he named oleomargarine. Butter had a rival at last, a ruthless one. Margarine was cheap. It kept well. It looked and spread like butter. Industrialists loved it, and dairymen despaired. Within a generation, oleomargarine poured from factories in France, Holland, Germany, and, most consequentially, the United States. The American butter wars of the late 1800s were a spectacle of legislative absurdity and open bribery. Dairy states passed laws requiring margarine be dyed pink, so no housewife could mistake it for real butter. Vermont demanded red. Others demanded black. Federal taxes on colored margarine were levied at punishing ruinous rates. Butter lobbies bribed. Margarine lobbies bribed harder. The fat that once divided Christendom now divided Congress itself. Butter survived, but the modern kitchen never forgave it. And the 20th century brought butter new enemies. After the Second World War, scientific studies, some sound, some deeply flawed, implicated saturated fat in heart disease. Butter, so long the golden standard of nourishment, was suddenly recast as a killer at every table. Margarine, refined seed oils, hydrogenated shortenings, these were now sold as modern, healthful, progressive alternatives to butter. Butter was old. Butter was rural. Butter was, the advertising quietly suggested, faintly and disturbingly dangerous now. For decades, butter retreated. It vanished from hospital trays and school lunches. It was rationed out of industrial baking. Restaurants swapped it for cheaper spreads. In the 70s and 80s, Western per capita butter consumption reached historic lows. The fat that built cathedrals now hid, embarrassed, at the back of the dairy aisle. But butter waited. The science shifted. The trans fats in early margarines proved far worse for the human heart than saturated butter. Cultured butter, brown butter, ghee, grass-fed European butter, all returned in the late 20th century, carried by skeptical chefs. The croissant flaking on your morning plate is nothing but butter, folded 32 times into cold, patient dough. The viennoiserie of Paris, the sablé of Brittany, the shortbread of Scotland, the queen amande, the brioche, the puff pastry. Beneath every millefeuille, all of it is a hymn to the churn. Ghee sizzles in every Indian kitchen daily. Brown butter perfumes serious sauces from Copenhagen to Kyoto. Butter did not merely survive, it returned, quiet and undefeated. It slipped back into daily life worldwide. The fat that split a religion now sits quiet beside your bread. Consider what you have just learned. A food map is not a food map. It is a belief map. The line between butter and oil is no matter of taste. It is a fossil of theology and empire, a fossil of the Roman calendar, of the Cistercian ledger, of Luther's ink and Rouen Cathedral spire. Every kitchen in Europe carries an old schism in its pantry, whether the cook knows it or not. Tax, tithe, temptation, all of it is encoded in a pat of yellow fat you spread on morning toast. You are handling an artifact of the European mind, a substance that funded a Gothic tower and provoked Wittenberg. Butter redrew the borders of confession, launched trade wars, invented margarine, and quietly outlasted every one of its enemies. Butter is older than most nations, more durable than most doctrines, a yellow fat that outlived every empire. For all its drama, butter is not the fiercest food. One sweeter substance rewrote history even more violently. Subscribe for weekly videos about the incredible history of food. Next week, we uncover the sugar that toppled thrones. Sugar built empires on the backs of the enslaved.